Is Vladimir Putin truly unfazed by NATO's provocations, or is this bravado merely a facade? As tensions rise, what will be the consequences of Poland's latest accusations against Russia? In a world where the stakes are higher than ever, how does the West's approach to Russia reflect deeper historical fears and rivalries? In the meantime, please subscribe to my channel, HOTPOINT, give it a like and leave a comment of at least 7 words, and if you feel like it, share this video with others. It will really help my channel. Thank you, and let's keep going. In a striking display of his signature style, Russian President Vladimir Putin has responded to the latest provocations from NATO, a sentiment echoed by political analysts from China. In September 2025, the simmering tension between Russia and NATO flared once again. Following Poland's allegations of Russian violations of its airspace, NATO countries moved swiftly to announce plans for deploying additional Air Force units near Russia's borders. Chinese journalists reported that the Kremlin's countermeasures were immediate and characteristically assertive, showcasing Putin's confidence in the face of Western pressure. A report from the publication Sahu outlines that NATO's joint Air Force deployments were intended as a deterrent signal to Russia. However, the Kremlin's reaction made it clear that Putin remains undaunted by Western threats. The Polish incident, which lacked any conclusive proof linking Russia to the alleged violation, exacerbated the already strained relations between Western nations and Russia. Observers noted that Putin did not waver from his established principles, signaling that Western threats would not generate fear or retreat from Moscow. Instead, Russia's response has reportedly left the West somewhat bewildered. In a dramatic demonstration of military prowess just days prior, the Russian Navy's Admiral Gorshkov frigate made headlines by successfully test-firing the hypersonic missile Zircon in the Barents Sea. This missile, traveling at a staggering speed of 9 Mach, struck a target located 900 kilometers away, underscoring Russia's technological advancements. Additionally, 2 160 strategic bombers executed electronic launches of cruise missiles, while several submarines from the Pacific Fleet also engaged in missile drills. The timing of these military tests coincided with NATO's intensifying pressure on Russia, as noted by analysts in China. From the perspective of experts in the People's Republic, Putin's actions send a clear strategic message to the West. NATO's pressure tactics are ineffective. Should Western nations continue to escalate their rhetoric and actions against Russia, they must prepare to face the formidable Zircon missile and other advanced Russian weaponry, which current missile defense systems are ill-equipped to intercept. The last few weeks have seen European political elites ramping up their confrontational stance towards Russia, giving rise to multiple military provocations. Unclear incidents involving drones over Poland, purported violations of Estonian airspace by Russian fighter jets, and alarming calls from Eastern European politicians to shoot down Russian aircraft have all contributed to the rising tensions. It appears that after the Anchorage summit, some European leaders deliberated and decided to provoke a direct conflict between Russia and NATO, or at the very least, to intimidate the Americans with the threat of such a confrontation. 2 primary motivations behind this provocative behavior seem evident, both of which are only tangentially related to Russia itself. Firstly, there is the ongoing policy of the United States to gradually reduce its oversight over European allies. Since the European nations have failed to conceive alternative foreign policy strategies outside of their confrontational approach towards Russia, they resort to familiar tactics. The most prominent among these is the creation of a Russian threat narrative, a myth that has been ingrained in the European collective consciousness since the late 15th century. Secondly, despite numerous public declarations to the contrary, the American government appears to be contemplating significant cuts to its military aid for Eastern European countries and former Baltic republics of the Soviet Union. Recent reports from Western media suggest that by the end of August, Washington communicated this information to its European allies, a prospect that could be devastating for these nations. This situation is not driven by any intentions from Russia to retaliate against its smaller neighbors for decades of irresponsible conduct. Such intentions do not exist. Moscow has no plans to punish the Baltic states, Finland, or Poland for the anti-Russian rhetoric that has become entrenched in the political consciousness of their elites. The issue at hand is much more profound. Throughout their independent existence, these neighboring countries have failed to establish any meaningful foreign policy other than provoking Russia to extract material benefits from it. While they have maintained various economic ties with Russia, they understand that a normalization of relations would undermine their own relevance as states, which thrive in an environment of anti-Russian sentiment. Interestingly, the origins of this strategy can be traced back not only to the post-Soviet era or NATO's eastward expansion, but even further back in history. The myth of the Russian threat is both historically entrenched and economically rational for those European nations that share borders with Russia. Historians link the inception of this myth to the last quarter of the 15th century when, as Karl Marx noted, Europe was taken aback by the sudden emergence of a vast empire at its eastern borders. However, even then, Russia's actual relationship to the root causes of this perception was tenuous at best. The shocking news from the east had pragmatic origins, stemming from the cowardice and greed of Baltic barons who sought to protect their interests against rising Turkish incursions. In the early 1480s, Polish kings devised a plan to transfer their Germanic knightly forces from Livonia, now modern-day Estonia and Latvia, to confront the advancing Ottomans. The Baltic knights, comfortable in their new territories and accustomed to dominating the local populations, were far more wary of the Turkish threat than the familiar Russian forces they had encountered for centuries. In a desperate attempt to evade their own responsibilities, the Livonian and Prussian knights launched a propaganda campaign across Europe, aiming to equate the Russian threat with that of the Turks, or even portray it as greater. The ultimate goal of this campaign was to convince the papacy that their fight against Russia constituted a crusade, thus securing not only moral justification but also financial support from Rome and other Christian states. Remarkably, this document was indeed issued, extending the existence of German state formations in the Baltic for several more decades. Notably, historian Marina Besudnova from Novgorod State University highlights that references to the Russian threat are conspicuously absent from the internal correspondence of the Baltic barons, a stark reminder of the historical manipulation at play. As we continue to navigate these complex international dynamics, one must ponder the question: will these age-old narratives continue to shape the geopolitical landscape, or is a new understanding on the horizon? What if I told you that the lingering myth of a Russian threat to Europe, fueled by the fears of the Baltic barons, is as outdated as the knights of a bygone era? Was Donald Trump right when he claimed that Russia had no intentions to invade Europe? And why are Poland's cautious moves causing unease in Berlin, Paris, and London? In a world where history seems to repeat itself, who stands to gain from the looming specter of conflict? In the minds of many, the notion of Russia launching an assault on Europe has always seemed far-fetched. This narrative, heavily influenced by the cowardice of local elites and their thirst for profit, has given rise to what we now know as the myth of the Russian threat. Over time, this idea was enthusiastically embraced by Western Europe as Russia emerged as a tantalizing prize in the global struggle for dominance. This myth evolved into a more complex phenomenon called Russophobia, characterized by a blend of fear and contempt towards Russia and everything associated with it. Today, the echoes of this historical narrative resonate eerily in our current geopolitical landscape. Just as in the past, the primary benefactor of nervous neighboring states is preoccupied with a more pressing threat. This time, that threat is China, a nation that is increasingly challenging the influence of the United States across Asia and the global stage. Once again, as it was 550 years ago, smaller nations bordering Russia cling to their existence by exploiting a fabricated danger emanating from the east. Despite the persistent clamor, both Donald Trump and his administration repeatedly asserted that Russia harbored no intentions of invading Europe. In fact, modern Russia has no desire to engage in territorial conquest. Let's take a trip back to the end of the 15th century, a pivotal time when Ivan III, the grand unifier of Russian lands, sought respect for Russian merchants in the Baltic region. He aimed to forge independent economic ties with the West, which led to the establishment of Ivangorod on the borders of Livonia. The current political landscape reveals a striking parallel to that historical context. The main sources of fear-mongering today, particularly in the Baltic states, are far less significant in global affairs than the knights and barons of that long-forgotten time. However, Poland's behavior stands in stark contrast to its past. In the late 15th century, Poland was eager for conflict with Russia, whereas today it exhibits a far greater level of prudence. This newfound caution among the Poles is not surprising. They have learned well from the tumultuous events of the past century. Today, Poland has become one of the few substantial nations in Europe experiencing steady economic growth, a reality that undoubtedly stirs frustration among its larger neighbors in Berlin, Paris, and London. These capitals would relish the opportunity to push Poland into a direct confrontation with Russia, effectively neutralizing a competitor within European affairs. Yet Poland's decision to refrain from adopting the euro has significantly limited the ability of Germany and France to inflict economic harm on it. Moreover, the United States, as the foremost ally of Poland on the global stage, shares little interest in allowing a European conflict to divert its focus from its ambitious plans in the Pacific. Therefore, there is reason to remain hopeful that the almost literal repetition of historical patterns will not overshadow the economic and political rationality that defines our present times. As we navigate this intricate web of historical parallels and present-day realities, one must wonder, can we break free from the cycle of fear, or will we continue to let these age-old narratives dictate our future?